Hello and welcome to Stage to Sofa. Today it is my absolute privilege to be joined by world-renowned singing teacher Gary Coward, who is currently teaching at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama and also on the Royal Opera House Jette Parker Young Artist Programme in Covent Garden. Gary has had very many successful professional singers in his time that he's taught, who have all gone on to be prize winners at Cardiff Singer of the World and the Ferrier, to name but a few. And amongst Gary's students is Grammy-award winning bass-baritone Gerald Finley. Gary, it's so lovely to have you here. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
Very, very welcome. So how are you coping with this huge transition that you're faced with in terms of your teaching?
Well, thank goodness for Skype and Zoom and Teams and things like that, because it's enabled us to at least keep in contact. It's not ideal for sound inevitably, because overtones tend not to be picked up by digital sound. So it's not perfect, but it's wonderful to think, even 20 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to do this. Conservatoires and universities really wouldn't have been able to continue teaching under the circumstances, of lockdown. So, it's great. It means that I can be at home. So, I think the world is divided into the youngsters and those of seniority, such as myself. We tend to like being locked down. We can stay in our gardens if we have them and enjoy the wonderful UK spring that we're having, and thinking, you know what, retirement isn't a bad thing. But I know your generation will be stir crazy and wanting to get out and do things and see people. So I completely understand that. But happily, I'm in the shall we say over 30 brigade, and I'm feeling very happy where I am, and slightly dreading going back to London and being on tubes and all that kind of thing.
I feel you with that completely. It's really difficult to think of that new mindset of, okay, getting back on a train again. But I'm glad to hear that you're safe and well and that you're enjoying as much as you can lockdown. Now, I'm wondering, at what point, Gary, did you decide, do you know what, I think I would like to dedicate all my time to teaching the next generation of opera singers? Did you have a aha moment?
It was one of those things that just seemed to morph, because to be honest, I think there's sort of like a latent teacher in me all my life, because as a youngster, when I started getting interested in singing, and when my voice broke and I started taking singing lessons from about 14, I suppose 14 or 15, I just became slightly obsessed with the singing voice, much to my parents' mild displeasure, because I was always singing or listening to singing in the household. Kind of opera singing in a council estate in Lincoln is not necessarily the done thing. So, but they supported, so that was great. So I've always loved the human voice, and I've always been fascinated how it works. And I'm afraid I'm old enough to have caught what I think is the tail end of a golden era of singing, which reached a peak in the 1950s and 60s with the likes of Callas and Bobby singing wonderfully, but also becoming much more dramatic in what they did, much more truthful in drama, and leader singers like Fischer-Dieskau and Schwarzkopf and Ludwig taking it up to new levels. And it was a very, very rich period, lots and lots of tenors, lots of dramatic sopranos. It was really rich, and I just caught the tail end of that in the mid-70s when I was a student in London. And so I heard many of these glorious singers like Vickers and Nielsen and Caballé in her prime, and Leontine Price and Nikolai Gedda, Alfredo Kraus, Carlo Bergonzi. You took it for granted. You took that level for granted. And at the risk of getting on my hobby, which I'm not going to do, I'm disappointed that I don't get such a choice as I do now. So I think there's been something inside me to say, how can we get back to another golden age? Now, I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but that is at the back of my mind. And so when I started to do a bit of teaching, which was precipitated really, you've mentioned Jerry Finley, he was going through a kind of phase in his singing whereby he was trying new roles out and wondered if he was going in a different direction. He was not getting fed up with Mozart and Figaro and the Count and things like that. But if you get to kind of middle years, if you're a baritone, it often opens up a field for new roles. And I think, and others did, and he does now think that perhaps he was going in a slightly different direction. And so I helped to pull him back and put him in what I think was the right direction for him. And I think he's benefited from looking at his voice and technique and developing more and actually sounding more youthful than he did. So that's how it really all started. And then it didn't really, I didn't make a decision to take up full-time teaching. It just sort of morphed. My career at E&O started to peter out a little bit. They were very good to me and let me take time out to teach. So, and then I just sort of gave up, and here I am teaching more or less full-time. So that was a very long answer to a brief question, but
no, that's great. No, I don't need to edit. It's fantastic. And it's really interesting to hear the journey that you had, because I know, as you mentioned, you were a young singer at the Royal College of Music. What did that time look like for you as a young graduate about to start work with ENO in English touring opera? How did you find that time when you first came out of Royal College of Music?
Yeah, you're right in many respects there. I did actually take a period out when I left college, because I went when I was 18 and finished when I was 21, and felt that I was not really ready to do this job. So I did actually take some time out. I actually worked in a mental hospital for the criminally insane. I'm not sure whether that phrase is quite politically correct now, but it was a top security mental hospital. And I worked there for 4 years, and then I sort of started getting back into singing again. So I was quite a late developer, and maybe a rather lazy developer as well. But when I was at the college, although I didn't have a particularly good time there, not because of them, but because of me, I felt that the prospect for young singers was much rosier than it is now. I think there are more and more singers. In particular, I wouldn't like to talk about a field, an instrumental field, which I don't really know about, but certainly there were fewer singers in my day then, and so therefore they were more easily able to go into work quite quickly without this kind of ravenous queuing system of just trying to get an audition. So we sort of have this problem that the elephant in the room is that classical music is not as popular as it used to be, unfortunately. And so performances are dwindling somewhat, but the quantity of singers is not. So it's a very competitive field, and it's not an easy one for any young singer to go into today, let alone what we're going through now, which is only going to delay the return and make it more difficult. I feel particularly for young singers who are all dressed up, ready to go, and we have this coronavirus world where, unfortunately, any large gatherings are going to be at the end of the line for the release of lockdown. So it's not a particularly rosy time. However, you asked me what the future might be of opera, and so I think this might just gel into an answer for another question. Is that I do think that historically that after some kind of political repression or natural disaster, the arts have always flourished. So I do think there's going to be a rosier time ahead, but it won't be for some time yet, I fear.
Yeah, this is something that actually, you're right, it was going to gel into my next question. In terms of moving forwards, on the other side of this horrible situation we've all found ourselves in, there will be another side. And at what point do you think it's going to change? And do you think it's going to change for the better? Because you've taught so many fantastic young singers, and I'm just wondering how you see it moving forwards, if there's any other way we can do things to prepare and build young singers for the career ahead of them.
Well, out of darkness comes light, and I do feel that people are going to rethink things, because if there are fewer performances, and I fear that that some companies, if we don't get going quite quickly because they're not generating income, and traditionally the arts are generally poor, is that can some of the smaller companies withstand this financial shock, and will some fall by the wayside? We keep our fingers crossed and hope not. But I do think there will be a rethinking. Also this business of not having been able to travel. And I think maybe some people are quite enjoying not having to travel a lot, because it is rather tiresome, it is rather wearisome. And also there are the implications of problems with climate and the environment. And I suspect that maybe a lot of opera companies will be thinking, well, is it just not easier to have singers on the doorstep? And so recently, over the last generation or so, there's been a big change in the way opera companies are run. There was a time where they're mostly repertory companies, and artists were contracted for at least a season or more. And so, a kind of ensemble would be generated. There was a very famous one, of course, in Vienna, really, the famous Mozart ensemble, the likes of Emrod Siegfried and Lisa Di Casa and George London, great array of wonderful singers who just stayed in Vienna for a number of years and built up this wonderful ensemble. And I think that could be a very good thing, especially for young singers, to actually not just come on an artist program for 2 years and then say, goodbye, thank you very much, kind of thing. It's not quite as simple as that, because very often they're brought back and they're used by that company. But to actually have young singers working in an opera house where their careers are overseen by music staff who know them, and can be given the right kind of roles incrementally as their careers develop, and maybe stay there for 2, 3, 4 years, build up a relationship and have a home house with singers locally, then I suspect, because of these circumstances, that is more likely to happen. And I think it would be a very good thing, especially for young singers. I do think the best way to learn how to sing and how to be an opera singer is to have a kind of apprenticeship scheme where you are in a house, and okay, you may not be singing Violetta or Manrico, but that's a good thing generally, and you are looked after, and you're enabled to develop at your own pace with the right kind of guidance. And I do feel that's the best process for any singer, or indeed any repetiteur or conductor, to build their skills, rather than have endless coaching. It just seems to be the answer to everything. Oh, we've got singers on our hands, what should we do them? Let's give them some coaching. More is not more. Singers need to get their voices in a very good condition so that they can have a trouble-free career and can go out there and not worry about where the next top note is coming from. How do they diminuendo? All of these things. Are they going to have the standard to get to the end of this difficult aria? All of that is sorted. Go out there and then just learn how to communicate with an audience, how to make them enjoy an evening out at the opera, how to be beguiled by this wonderful thing, the human voice, which is, when it's free and when it's open and when it's genuine and when it's true, it is a very, very powerful sound medium to move people. So I'm hoping eventually for good things from this.
Fingers crossed. It would be very nice. And as you said, I think there's something to be said hugely for real life opera experience on stage in a company. It gives you the best sort of foundation you could possibly ask for, I think. So let's hope that there might be some positivity coming out of this situation as we move forwards. Now, Gary, in terms of obstacles, what obstacles have you faced, and what has been the biggest one that you faced to get to the point that you're at? Because you're currently at such a very high standard of teaching and you've had a fabulous career. So what has been that biggest obstacle to get to?
It's not really been a fabulous career. It's been a jobbing career, Phoebe, and I'm grateful to have been in work and to have had a new lease of life as a teacher. But thank you for your encouragement.
Well, you've had some fantastic students, so I would consider it fabulous.
Well, maybe the teaching was supposed to be more impressive than singing, but I'm not professing anything. There's still a bit of life left in me. Yet the great Manuel Garcia was still teaching at the Royal Academy of the Royal College of Music. I think the Academy, when he was 99 and he lived to the grand old age of 101. So I'm not saying that to break any records, but I think in teaching, any kind of teaching, as long as your mind is sound, then you should just get better and better, because teaching is all about experience. But anyway, obstacles. To be honest, I've led a sort of life that has not really had massive highs or massive lows, and I can't really say I've had any obstacles. It's just potted along, you know, quite nicely. And as regards to teaching, there haven't really, again, haven't been any obstacles, because I mean, to be honest, I was fast-tracked into the world of the teaching of singing by Gerald Finley. You know, so he was essentially my first main student. But because it worked, you know, well, then I sort of got a bit of a name quite quickly. So, you know, I benefited from that. I dare say, had I set my stall out to be a singing teacher when I was in my 20s, then you just have to start slowly building by teaching local amateurs, and, you know, you might get somebody who's talented, or you might be a youngster who's talented, and it takes a long time to build a career as a singing teacher, because you have to have a few successes before the big hitters want to come and have a slice of the action. So I was really fast-tracked into that. So I have no complaints. It was a great help. I didn't really have an obstacle. So I'm very lucky.
That is incredibly lucky, and I'm glad to hear it, because you have had a very fabulous teaching career, and it sounds so exciting how it just snowballed. I'm wondering what you felt at that point in time when that started happening and you started getting all these names in. How did that make you feel? Did you feel overwhelmed, or did you just go along with it, as you said?
Well, to be honest, you know, you say all these nice things about me, and I sometimes hear about other people saying nice things about me, but I live and work in my ivory tower. I just sit in my studio in Balham, or in the room at Guildhall, or, you know, in a teaching studio at Covent Garden. And people come in and people go out, and I get a cup of coffee and go to the toilet occasionally. And then I go home and water the plants in the garden and watch Family Guy. And it's just a very ordinary life. So I don't really, to be honest, I don't really know what's going on. And when I do hear something, you know, or you know, I hear that I have a reputation, it sort of comes as a surprise, because I'm not out there, you know, in the big wide world, seeing how people react. I don't do master classes, partly because, first of all, I think you have to be a master before you do a master class. And so I just sit in my room and teach one-to-one. So I'm not trying to be modest, but I just really don't quite know what's going on. And if I go to a concert or an opera and hear somebody I teach singing well, that's nice. You know, that's the reward. That's job done, essentially. So and I'm not quite in the melee of things.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And you are very modest, I feel, because you have had such success. But I love that you watch Family Guy as well. That's great. Really has made my day. No, in terms of Gary, this situation we're faced with, what advice do you have to young singers that are currently sat, as you said, all dressed, ready to go? What advice do you have for them to utilise the time that they have that currently is unending?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very easy to get down, I think, in a situation like this, and I totally understand that. But I've been saying this to all of my students. You know, a lot of my students are young singers, professional singers, and their work has dried up, so they've not been having singing lessons because they can't afford it. But the ones I'm still teaching, I say, well, look, okay, this is an opportunity to work on your voices, to really focus on technique, keep building it. You know, the great singers of the past, one thing we know about them, the really successful ones, are not those who just rested on their laurels and thought, yeah, job done, I've been to conservatoire, I know how to use my voice. The great Matteo Battistini, for instance, king of baritones and baritones of kings, baritone of kings as he was known, you know, sang to the Tsar and the King of Spain and everything. He was a truly great singer in any historical period. But even when he was doing his last performances, when he was in his early 70s, he would bring his pianist over in the morning if he was doing a role in the evening. He would work on the roles, he'd keep fining things down, honing phrases to perfection, always working on his voice, doing his vocal easers, even when he was in his 70s. So it's very important, you know, like an athlete, to keep your voice in good condition. I do think that singers, unfortunately, because we can make these big fine sounds, and because we do a lot of work, we tend to do lots and lots of rehearsal. rehearsals and not so many performances, particularly in the world of opera. Whereas the Battistini era, there'd be lots of performances and very little rehearsals. Now, I think it's a balance to be seen there, of course, but certainly the great singers generally in their biographies and autobiographies, they talk about their exercise routine, and we are like athletes. We have to keep our voice in good condition, like any instrumentalist. And because singers sing a lot, and you know, they might just do a little bit of me, me, me and blowing through a straw, or goodness knows what the latest fad is before they go to rehearsal. They then rehearse for 6 hours and probably don't feel like practicing. So it's a tricky one, but I do think you can just find some time in your career to keep looking at yourself as a vocal athlete, and you have to keep in pristine condition, and you have to keep getting better, because as you get older, then the spirit remains willing, but the flesh does start to weaken somewhat, and so you have to keep at it. You know, and if you don't, then the voice over a long period of time will start to suffer if you're not careful, and it's unlikely you'll be as good in your 50s as you were in your 30s and 40s. And my belief is that you should be getting better in your 50s.
Yeah, I completely understand that. I really do. It's very much, as you said, it's an athleticism. It's not something that you can just sit and hope that it's still there in a year's time. It's something that takes work. How do you help your singers balance between the technical side of things and the artistry side? Because I know sometimes it can completely overtake singers to think in a technical manner. How do you encourage your students to get a balance between the two?
Well, I'm not sure that I do. You're right, that therein lies the problem, which is why I think it's good to try and get things sorted out as early as possible. You know, when you are a young student, try and spend most of your time working on your voice itself and exercise, and don't rush off to sing Der Feuerreiter or Kennst du das Land or Casta Diva or Celeste Aida. Work on the basics and get these things sorted when you are young, particularly when you're at conservatoire or if you're a young singer and not getting a lot of work. Use the time to invest in the future by making sure that all of these technical things are sorted. So then it's just a question of ticking over, making sure the voice is fresh, keep it agile, keep it athletic, ensure that there's this perfect synchronicity between breath and resonance. Always check on that, and do that while you can, because once it is sorted, like anything, if it is sorted properly, then you don't have to do anything else apart from just keep it going. But keeping it going is not just going out there and singing. It is just finding even a quarter of an hour in the morning before you go to your rehearsal, just to get the voice going a little bit. It is a wonderful refresher, gets you fresh for the day, but it's an investment for the longevity of a trouble-free career.
Thank you, Gary. That's fantastic advice. And I'm sure lots of our young singers watching this will take that away with great warmth. So thank you. Now, my final question for you, Gary, is what piece of advice would you give to an 18-year-old Gary?
Get a proper job. Oh dear, I'd be revealing lots of secrets. I would say listen to others, because as a youngster I didn't listen to others enough. I thought I knew best, and I'm afraid that kind of slightly northern I know best kind of way, you can chime in with that, Phoebe, I know. In some ways is a good thing, because it makes you confident, and it makes you really have trust and belief in what you're doing, even if what you're doing is not ultimately right. If I'd have listened to others more, then I think I would have been more successful, particularly to sing. But you just have to be yourself. You have to be yourself. And you have to learn. Every generation has to learn from the experience of the previous generation. We can advise. We can say, "Well, don't do that because this will happen." I know they'll go away and they'll do it, and then they'll find out that, oh dear, that happened. But then they'll know. So ultimately, really be yourself. Be yourself. Be true to yourself. Be honest. Be honest with yourself, and also be honest with your voice. Don't try to be something that you are not. Don't try to be too mature too soon. find your own true voice, and then be patient and develop that. And then you will be a Pavarotti or a Wunderlich or a Callas or a Nielsen, because you will be yourself. And people will recognize you as what you are and not as a pale imitation of the previous generation.
Gary Coward, you've been fantastic to speak to you today. Thank you so much. That advice is golden, and I've really loved having time with you to speak like this. So thank you for joining me on Stage to Sofa.
Well, thank you very much.